About 15 years ago, I went to visit a friend in Hong Kong, and at the time I was very superstitious. So upon landing, this was still at the old Hong Kong airport at Kai Tak when it was smack in the middle of the city. I thought, if I see something good, I'm going to have a great time here in my 2 weeks. And if I see something negative, I'm going to be miserable indeed. So the plane landed in between the buildings and got to a full stop in front of this little billboard. And I actually went to see some other design companies in Hong Kong in my stay there. And it turned out that I just went to see what they are doing in Hong Kong. But I actually walked away with a great job offer. And I flew back to Austria, packed my bags, and another week later, I was again on my way to Hong Kong, still superstitious, and thinking, well, if that winner billboard is still up, I'm going to have a good time working here. But if it's gone, it's going to be really miserable and stressful. So it turned out that not only was the billboard still up, but they had put this one right next to it. On the other hand, it also taught me where superstition gets me, because I really had a terrible time in Hong Kong. However, I did have a number of real moments of happiness in my life. I think what the conference brochure refers to as moments that take your breath away. And since I'm a big list maker, I actually listed them all. Now, you don't have to go through the trouble of reading them, and I won't read them for you. I know that it's incredibly boring to hear about other people's happinesses. What I did do, though, is I actually looked at them from a design standpoint and just eliminated all the ones that had nothing to do with design. And very surprisingly, over half of them had actually something to do with design. So there's, of course, two different possibilities. There's one from a consumer's point of view where I was happy while experiencing design. And I just give you one example. I had gotten my first Walkman. This is 1983. My brother had this great Yamaha motorcycle that he was willing to borrow to me freely. And the Police's Synchronicity cassette has just been released, and there was no helmet law in my hometown of Bregenz, so you could drive up into the mountains freely, blasting the Police on the new Sony Walkman. And I remember it as a true moment of happiness. Of course, they are related to this combination of at least two of them being, design objects. And, there's a scale of happiness when you talk about in design, but the motorcycle incident would definitely be, situated somewhere here, right in there between delight and bliss. Now, there is the other part from a designer's standpoint. If you're happy while actually doing it, and one way to see how happy designers are when they're designing could be to look at the author's photos on the back of their monographs. So according to this, the Australians and the Japanese, as well as the Mexicans, are very happy, while somewhat the Spaniards, and I think particularly the Swiss, don't be doing all that well. Last November, a museum opened in Tokyo called the Mori Museum in a skyscraper up on the 56th floor. And their inaugural exhibit was called Happiness. And I went very eagerly to see because, well, also with an eye on this conference. And they interestingly sectioned the exhibit off into 4 different areas. Under Arcadia, they showed things like this from the Edo period, 100 ways to write happiness in different forms. Or they had this apple by Yoko Ono that, of course, later on was, made into the label for the Beatles. Under Nirvana, they showed this constable painting. And there was an interesting theory about abstraction. This is a blue field, is actually an Yves Klein painting. And the theory was that if you abstract an image, you really, open as much room for the unrepresentable, and therefore, are able to involve the viewer more. Then under Desire, they showed these Shunshou paintings, also from the Edo period, ink on silk. And lastly, under Harmony, they had this 13th century mandala from Tibet. Now, what I took away from the exhibit was that maybe with the exception of the mandala, most of the pieces in there were actually about the visualization of happiness and not about happiness. And I felt a little bit cheated because the visualization, that's a really easy thing to do. And, my studio, or we've done it all the time. This is, a book, a happy dog, and you take it out, it's an aggressive dog. It's a happy David Byrne and an angry David Byrne. Or a chess poster with a happy face and a more aggressive face. That's not a big deal to accomplish. It gotten to the point where, within advertising or within the movie industry, happy has gotten such a bad reputation that if you actually want to do something with the subject and still appear authentic, you almost would have to, do it from a cynical point of view. This is, the movie poster. Or we, a couple of weeks ago, designed a box set for the Talking Heads where the happiness visualized on the cover definitely has very much a dark side to it. Much, much more difficult is this, where the designs actually can evoke happiness. And I'm going to just show you 3 that actually did this for me. This is a campaign done by a young artist in New York who calls himself True. Everybody who has ridden the New York subway system will be familiar with these signs. True printed his own version of these signs, met every Wednesday at a subway stop. With 20 of his friends, they divided up the different subway lines and added their own version. So this is one. Now, the way this works in the system is that nobody ever looks at these signs. So you're really bored in the subway and you kind of stare at something, and it takes you a while until it actually you realize that this says something different than what it normally says. That's at least how it made me happy. Now, True is a real humanitarian, and he didn't want any of his friends to be arrested, so he supplied everybody with this fake volunteer card and also gave this fake letter from the MTA to everybody, sort of like pretending that it's an art project financed by the Metropolitan Transit Authority. Another New York project, this is at PS1, a sculpture that's basically a square room by James Turrell that has a retractable ceiling, opens up at dusk and dawn every day. You don't see the horizon, you're just in there watching the incredible, subtle changes of color in the sky. And the room is truly something to be seen. People's demeanor changes when they go in there, and for sure, I haven't looked at the sky in the same way after spending an hour in there. There are, of course, more than those 3 projects that I'm showing here. I would definitely say that observing Vic Muniz's cloud a couple of years ago in Manhattan for sure made me happy as well. And then, but my last project is again from a young designer from in New York. He's from Korea originally, and he took it upon himself to print 55,000 speech bubbles, empty speech bubbles, stickers, large ones and small ones, and he goes around New York and just puts them, empty as they are, on posters. And other people go and fill them in. This one says, "Please let me die in peace." I think that was the most surprising to myself, was that the writing was actually so good. This is on a musician poster that says, "I am concerned that my CD will not sell more than 200,000 units, and that, as a result, my recoupable advance from my label will be taken from me, after which my contract will be cancelled, and I'll be back doing journey covers on Bleecker Street." I think the reason this works so well is because everybody involved wins. She gets to have his project, the public gets a sweeter environment, and different public gets a place to express themselves, and the advertisers finally get somebody to look at their ads. Well, there was a question, of course, that was on my mind for a while. Can I do more of the things that I like doing in design and less of the ones that I don't like to be doing? Which brought me back to my list making, just to see what I actually like about my job. One is just working without pressure, then working concentrated without being frazzled, or as Nancy said before, like really immerse oneself into it, trying not to get stuck doing the same thing, or trying not to get stuck behind the computer all day. This is, related to it, getting out of the studio. Then, of course, trying to, work on things where the content is actually important for me, and being able to enjoy the end results. And then I found another list in one of my diaries that actually contained all the things that I thought I learned in my life so far. And just about at that time, an Austrian magazine called and asked if we would want to do 6 spreads, design 6 spreads that work like dividing pages between the different chapters in the magazine. And the whole thing just fell together. So I just picked one of the things that I thought I learned. In this case, everything I do always comes back to me, and we made these spreads right out of this. So it was everything I do always comes back to me. A couple of weeks ago, a French company asked us to design 5 billboards for them. Again, we could supply the content for it. So I just picked another one, and this was 2 weeks ago. We flew to Arizona, the designer who works with me and myself, and photographed this one. So it's trying to look good, limits my life. And then we did one more of these. This is again for a magazine, dividing pages. This is having. This is the same thing. It's just, photographed from the side. This is from the front. Then it's guts. Again, it's the same thing. Guts is just the same room reworked. Then it's always works out. then it's 4 with the light on, and it's me. Thank you so much.